On the show today, I'm so excited to be chatting with Luke West. Luke West is the host of the Imperfect Pod, a podcast that discusses manhood and masculinity more intentionally and purposefully. His goal is to build generations of men who love themselves and others more deeply and healthily. He desires to leave his listeners with the idea that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to the idea of masculinity. Topics of his show include family, relationships, pornography, sex, gender, dating, divorce, toxic masculinity, addiction, and much, much more. Luke, I am so excited to be having you here on the show today.
Shadman, I'm very excited. It's always interesting having people read my bio because I'm like, I feel like I hate sending bios over because I'm like, I don't think anything I've done is super credible, you know? So it's always interesting hearing that come back.
No, Luke. I mean, what you've done with the Imperfect Pod definitely has a lot of credit and merit to it in terms of the discussion around masculinity. And to take a little bit of a step back, so Luke and I, we kind of connected a couple months back and we wanted to sync up and talk about this topic about masculinity, given how there's such a gray area. There's such a lot of conversation that goes on with masculinity and how men have a tough time navigating what does it mean to be a man. And, you know, there's certain notions, certain ideas that color and shape the way we view masculinity in unhealthy ways potentially, and that really ripples down into men's lives later down the road. And so today, I'm excited to be chatting today with you, Luke, given the extensive amount of conversations you've had with so many people from different areas and facets of life and getting their perspective towards redefining what masculinity looks like. And I think in the day and age we're currently in, it's definitely a conversation that has come up to the brim a lot more, and we're starting to redefine it. And you yourself are, you know, definitely paving the way towards reshaping the way that we look at our masculinity. And so I'm curious, when did you first get intrigued at the idea of exploring masculinity from so many different perspectives?
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. So for background, I was homeschooled until grade 9. That was just the way and the environment I grew up in. And so I never really heard a lot of those coded messages about boys will be boys, and a lot of the messages about, oh, if a guy hits a girl when he's like 6 or 7 years old, it means he likes her. Like, that was never embedded into me because my parents and I never went through that system of really the education system. And so when I went to high school in grade 9, I kind of thought it was really interesting to navigate a lot of the social dynamics of high school. And I played sports. So hockey and baseball were the two big ones. So, I mean, I was around guys. It wasn't like I was that isolated homeschooled kid. That wasn't it at all that people often think about. I still had a social life and acclimatized very well. But I also felt like really more emotionally mature because I was in an environment where I was allowed to emotionally mature. You know, I always think of the school system and how detrimental it is to young children because a teacher might have 20 to 30 kids in a classroom. And how are you working and enabling each child at an individual level to grow? And especially every kid is so different. So I actually was able to be in an environment. I have 3 older siblings. So I was the youngest of 4, really being molded, I guess, and shaped by some really focused teaching. Like, I skipped 3 grades of math because my mom's like, you don't need grade 4, 5, and 6 because you sat at the table with your older siblings learning that math. So in the way that shaped me as a younger child, I think by the time I got to high school and university, I had a little bit more emotional maturity. I found it really hard to be friends with young guys who were just kind of clowning around all the time. And I loved clowning around, but I also loved deep conversations with people. And then, and so moved to university. I switched to communication studies, and I found a lot of the conversations there really interesting, from philosophy, from history, from social studies to gender. And I was still navigating that relationships with young men because I still found them really hard. A lot of my friends were girls, and I'm like, I need to either change my judgment of other men to build and foster those relationships, because I think they are really important for men as they mature. And I think we're going to talk about that a bit more later, about how important male bonds and male relationships are. And so then I was put into a leadership position where I had 15 young men and 6 women because I was a resident assistant RA. I don't know what they call it, maybe
Hmm.
in America, but yeah. So I was helping first years adapt, and I had 15 young guys, and I'm like, it was so intimidating for me as someone who never got was able to really be friends and relate to young men in university because they were all like frat boys or want to be like alpha males, like
Hmm.
like that kind
Hmm.
of dynamic.
Right.
And so I was really nervous about navigating and leading a community that was very male dominated. But throughout that experience, I learned a lot. I learned how to have conversations with them. I knew how to navigate their feelings. I learned that everyone has emotions, whether how much they try to hide it doesn't matter. And if you can speak to them on an individual level, on a level of like, hey, I'm going to lead in a way that you can respect me no matter what I do, not just because I'm a man, not just because I'm a white man or however, whatever is tied into it. I want to be respected as like a human, and I want to be vulnerable. I lead with vulnerability and authenticity. That's how I like to lead. And it was about a year and a half after that that I realized I do have an effect on young men and that young men will listen to me and they might not agree with me, but they'll listen and they'll respect it. And I saw that as maybe a middleman to the discussions that are kind of going on. I can relate to the people that are like, toxic masculinity doesn't exist and oh, it's all bad. And the narratives around men being bad all the time, it can be very overbearing. And I help them reframe it. And then I also speak to people on maybe more political left. And I say, and I try to navigate those ideas and I try to bring people together in the middle to realize that there's so much nuance to the conversation. And
Hmm.
so it was about a year and a half after realizing that myself that I started the Imperfect Pod. And now I'm 71 episodes deep talking about lots of different things. Um, and that's kind of how it all started.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, it's crazy how, like you mentioned, your upbringing being homeschooled, and you would think that there's so many of different facets when it comes to masculinity you may have not been exposed to, but I think it provided you a different perspective on how to approach it from a much more emotionally based type of insight, type of view into what masculinity looks like. And you touched on it there at the end in regards to this idea of toxic masculinity, the types of notions that go on to what it stereotypically has meant for the last couple of decades in terms of what it means to be a man. Having explored masculinity with the Imperfect Pod, with your own exploration of self throughout the last couple of years, or rather throughout your entire life, what in your opinion does it mean to be masculine, and how does one end up becoming masculine given that definition that you have?
Yeah. So I really live by this idea that there is no one size fits all idea like of masculinity. And I think that's really important. And when I don't think it helps that, especially in Western societies, North America, we see the rugged individual, the cowboy, the mafia guy in movies as the true masculine, the guys with beards, jacked, willing to fight to do anything to keep their honor. And
Mhm.
to me, that is not how I have ever been. It's not how I care to be. And I know that about myself. So within masculinity, and the more I've dug into it, there's these 4 archetypes of masculinity. Like there's the king, there's the warrior, there's the lover, and there's the magician. And so much of what happens in Western society is that we've idolized the idea of the king and the warrior. And we've totally forgotten these ideas of the lover and the magician. And I think all men are brought up or composed of those 4 things. I don't really believe in the philosophy of the 4 archetypes, but I believe that we all have the ability within each of us to be lovers and to be fighters and to be warriors. Um, and that's kind of how I see masculinity for myself. It's I knew that I wasn't some sports jock. I knew that the language that was used in a lot of locker rooms made me uncomfortable, and it wasn't for me. And I think that is relatable for a lot of young men. It's just so easy to fall into the trap of that is what is expected of you. So then
Mhm.
now you perpetuate that, or and this is something that is really attributed to a lot of male groups and male dominated groups. But the idea of like groupthink and not calling anything out, like the whistleblower gets so much hate no matter what politics, sports, literally the workplace, like any place that has a lot of people, the whistleblower is the one that's shamed because no
Mhm.
one really wants to address the problem. They want to sweep it under the rug. No one ever really does anything to actually fix the core issue. It's typically they want the whistleblower to stop talking, right? And that's how it works. And we've applied that, and we've kind of taken it to the extreme of men's circles of saying like men are bad. Well, it's like, no, this happens in every social group. This happens in like, it's literally just human psychology to not want to want to
Hmm.
fit in and belong. And part
Right.
of that belonging is not calling out the toxic behavior or the unhealthy behavior that might be existing. So to me, like when as I keep going more and more in depth into this idea of masculinity, I think it's just owning and embracing fully who you are. And I don't mean that in a way of what a lot of society says right now of like, I'm not going to change for you, and damn you if you think I'm going to be me my entire life. Like there are some things that you should change as a person, as people. I think there's components of yourself that you should listen to other people if they say this is unhealthy, you should change. But I mean, like, if you truly believe in every sense of yourself that this is the way that you define yourself as a human, as a man, then that is embracing masculinity. If you want to be a guy who swings an axe and loves lumberjack or trade jobs or anything like that, by all means do that. Just don't judge a guy who might be dressing in like skirts or wearing nail
Hmm.
polish or things like that. And if you're the person that likes to wear nail polish nowadays, don't judge the lumberjack for feeling like that is his most manly he can be if that's fully himself. So I really just want people to understand that masculinity and even just living your life is a really self-aware process,
Hmm.
and
Yep.
understanding what works for you. Nothing is truly masculine or feminine. Like these are just things that we've assigned to them. Like I love rom-coms and I love wine, and sometimes I drink wine while watching a rom-com. I also love sports and I don't like beer, so I'll watch sports and maybe not drink any beer. Like I just don't like beer because it makes me feel heavy and bloated,
Hmm.
and I don't understand why anyone would really like it, to be honest. But I also don't judge people that do like beer. And I think that's just like the safest way to put it is owning who you are as an individual, being comfortable doing things that are maybe attributed to masculine or feminine, but just being like, this is me, this is what I want to do, and owning that.
Yeah, definitely. I think owning who it is that you are, it's a difficult thing to come around to, given how, like you were mentioning, when it comes to groupthink, you're conditioned to not wanting to feel as if you are the outcast or the one that doesn't fit in with the group. You're always conditioned to wanting to feel as if you fit in. And that's just given our human nature of wanting to be social beings, wanting to fit into a clan, into a kinship. But I think maybe I'm curious, do you feel as if you've always had that innate ability to be one with yourself, given maybe being homeschooled and not being surrounded by groups in your everyday life? Or kind of how did you develop your own sense of self? And when did that kind of develop? Was it due to homeschooling, or do you think there's other factors that you can attribute to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it comes down to who I am as an individual. Like I've never really been swayed by public opinion, peer pressure. It's like it's not a huge thing for me. When I was in university and I went to a party, I could easily say, I'm not drinking tonight, and I wouldn't really be
Hmm.
swayed. I was always in I was always mature enough to be like, if this is what I'm going to do, it's because I want to do it, not because someone else forced me to do it. And so when it comes to, I guess, my own self-awareness, there was, I think, a component of it that definitely comes back to homeschooling. Like I wasn't told I was a special kid, or like, I'm capable of anything in the world. Like that wasn't it
Hmm.
at all. But I also don't think I was raised to believe that I couldn't be the person that I wanted to be, or the
Hmm.
person that I saw myself. And I don't know if my siblings can say the same. So I don't know if that's a parenting thing, but I've always been like someone who says to my siblings, why don't you just shoot for the moon? Like
Hmm.
really it's possible. My siblings do look up to me in that sense of, if like I really want to have Justin Bieber on my show and I believe I'll get him, and I
Hmm.
believe like it will happen, and I'm not afraid of getting turned down until it's a yes. Like there's just things I'm not afraid of in this life my siblings might be a little bit more hesitant to do. So I think a lot of it is individualistic. I think a lot of it is I've always been a really curious person, and in navigating myself really in tune with how I'm feeling. Um, and I love learning and reading and connecting dots. And I think that's a huge part of my life, is to continually read about the topic, and that's really how I see how I've adapted, is through a lot of self-reflection. I love to think meditation doesn't work for me. It like I've tried. The beginning of
Mhm.
this year, I literally tried meditation for 50 straight days, and I'm like, I like the noise in my brain, and I
Mhm.
like because I think it's a puzzle for me to connect the dots.
Mm.
And the whole point of meditation is to like not be your thoughts. But I'm like, I like my thoughts. Like I like the darkness. I like the brightness. I like piecing it all together in my head to make sure that it maps out correctly. Um, so that for me is a lot of time alone and actually like thinking in that alone time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that, how you're able to really get in tune with all the thoughts in your mind. I think it's funny that you bring that up now, kind of as a side note, because I've been meditating in the last year and I found that it's worked, it hasn't worked. And I'm thinking, maybe you're onto something there with the idea of wanting to connect the dots. And there's a reason why those thoughts, those emotions, that stimuli is so heightened. And, one of the things that you mentioned there was how you mentioned to your own siblings this idea of shooting for the moon and not being so fearful of what it is that you're shooting for. And there's this idea when it comes to masculinity that you illustrated in throughout your podcast, that masculinity is built upon fragility, and there's kind of a shaming factor that comes with certain aspects of our masculinity, and that two of the most destructive forces when it comes to emotions to masculinity are fear and anger. And so I'm curious, how can men begin, breaking down those walls of those destructive forces and become more vulnerable with their emotions, the way in which like you do when it comes to, getting in tune with those emotions and trying to connect all the dots?
Hmm. I think one is not caring what other people think. Like that's a huge component of it. And yeah, I really think that a lot of toxic masculinity lies, and even just masculinity in general lies between the idea of like anger and shame. And so when you have anger and shame, it's a really constant loop of, okay, I feel like men feel anger and then they feel shame about that anger. And then they feel anger about that shame. And
Mm-hmm.
so we get into this idea. And one thing that I've tried to explore on my podcast, and I really think it's true, is that we're not teaching young men how to explore their emotions well enough. So, for example, when we teach them, like, or when they're young and they say they're angry, very rarely are they angry. Like, you have to go deeper than just the anger. You have to go deeper and say, okay, what made you angry? Well, it's like, if it's a 6-year-old boy at school, they're like, someone took my popsicle. I'm like, okay, so what about that made you upset? And they're like, well, it was mine. My mom packed it. So they're more disappointed that they didn't get to have it, and they're more
Mm-hmm.
upset than they are angry. And so we just teach young men that whenever they feel emotion, typically it's anger. Like if they're ever like upset, it's anger. If they're ever sad, it's
Mm-hmm.
anger. And if we teach people to go deeper than that, they can actually open up a world of healing for themselves. When they're only told that they can feel anger and share anger, then anger becomes the only emotion that they're allowed to express. And so
Mm-hmm.
when they become 25-year-old men and they're in an argument with their partner or their friend or any type of relationship, it's like this well is sitting beneath them that they've never uncovered, they never unearthed, and they don't know how to navigate those emotions and how to dig that well. And so for me, I've gotten better of, if I'm in a rush hour and I'm stopped in traffic, okay, like I'm angry. Why am I angry? Well, I'm angry because I left my house late. I'm angry at myself. I'm not angry at this person in front of me. And
Mm-hmm.
okay, why are you angry? Well, I'm disappointed I'm not going to be at my friends on time. I'm going to have less time with them. So you get to like the more actual truth of the emotion than just the anger and shame. And so for me, what I've realized is when I was a kid, I was called sensitive a lot. And I'm like, and I always, whenever I was called sensitive, I'm like, why is being sensitive a bad thing? Like, why does it always feel like it's a negative connotation? Are we
Mm-hmm.
trying to get men to be more sensitive? And I think young men, when they have emotions, are very structured to not have those emotions. And oftentimes it comes from the men in their lives. Like this concept that, their fathers don't want them to show any weakness or fragility. And for me, a lot of my actual experiences came from women in my life saying, it's bad that you're so sensitive. Like, why are you so sensitive? And I'm not sure if, I don't think it was tied to like oversensitive for a man. I don't think it was ever gendered. When I hear or think back to those criticisms, it was always from women that I was
Mm,
too emotional or too whatever. And I'm like, okay, well, navigating that, what does that mean as we move forward as a society? How do we get men to be more emotional? If for me it was women that were kind of not allowing me to be emotional, and a lot of that came down to not caring. As I mentioned at the start, I think men just have to, and I see this all the time because I live in Reddit forums for this exact thing, like angry men, and they'll blame women in their lives for not being able to be like emotionally vulnerable.
mm-hmm.
And I'm like, to me, that's only a sign of who you need to get rid of in your life. Like that isn't to say that like they then project that onto all women. All women don't want me to be emotional. All women want this. All women are bad. And I'm like, just get those type of people out of your life. Like it's really actually
Right.
much more simple than that. But instead they go to these places that allow for this projection of anger onto other people rather than looking internally of like, okay, maybe I need to make different choices about who I spend my time with. Maybe I am actually too angry. Maybe I do need to navigate these emotions a little bit better. And I've had this conversation with someone who's done a lot of research in masculinity, and it's an idea I'm still wrestling with. It's so much easier to cast anger at other people rather than do your own self work about how to grow as an individual. So now when I'm reading a book and I feel really confronted by an idea, I'm like, okay, why do I feel angry? Is it because it's true? Is it because it's dumb and I need to explore it a bit more? Or is it because it's actually like touching on a sensitive point that I don't know anything about and I'm upset that I don't know anything about it? So I think a lot of it comes down to asking the right questions about your emotions, how you feel, and then just being okay with expressing and sharing that vulnerability. But a lot of it comes down to going deeper and learning more about those two emotions, because it's a lazy way to live your life is by saying I only
Mm.
feel anger and I only feel shame. And I will call out anyone's bullshit on that. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. I will call out anyone's BS on that if they're trying to say that it's all women or I'm not allowed to feel my emotions. I'm like, learn. You're a 25-year-old human
Mm-hmm.
being. You can learn how to do these things. Don't give me that BS about how no one gave you permission. You don't need permission. You're 25. Do it yourself.
Yep, there's some tough love for you listeners and viewers from Luke. But no, I wholeheartedly agree. You have complete autonomy, complete control to rewire the way in which you approach these situations, approach your emotions. No one's holding you back but yourself. And it's scary, I think, because like you were mentioning, what you end up finding is when you go deeper down into those questions and saying, what is causing this anger? What is causing this feeling of shame? And you're like, oh, it's really me. It's not really what I'm thinking as someone else causing this onto me. So now it's this dark image that you've now cast on yourself. You're like, oh, I'm a bad person. Oh, I don't think properly, or whatever the case may be. And I think a lot of people have a tough time wanting to think negatively because it's like self confirmation, or kind of a just holding yourself in higher regard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, with on top of this idea of questioning yourself with these emotions for men, kind of digging deeper into that well, like you were mentioning, of what is really underneath all of these emotions. What are some of the other practices or tips you found beneficial to fully explore and to continually evolve one's definition of masculinity in order to work towards becoming? Because I think the case is that every man wants to be more in tune with their emotions, but they are always hindering themselves from it. What are some ways, on top of this question, that you found helpful, maybe for yourself personally, as well as like other men that you've worked with and other people that have mentioned their own perspectives on the take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So before we get into that, I'll talk a little bit about the one of the wrong ways to do it. And so as I've gotten deeper into this conversation of masculinity, I've learned a lot about men's rights activist groups and other people who are having these conversations. And my biggest pet peeve with these other people that are having this conversation is that a lot of these groups that try to get men to see like feminism as the problem or women as the problem or like pop culture as the problem, what they're doing is they're deflecting from their own self. And so when we look at the bigger picture, a lot of men talk a lot about self-development, never complaining, holding yourself accountable for everything that happens in life. Screw the government. They don't care about you, right? At the same time, they're the most vocal group about complaining about what the government does
Mm.
to the family. They're the most vocal about anti-feminism and caring what so much happens there. Even though they love to do self-development for like learning jujitsu and journaling and stuff, what they hate to do is actually work on the ideologies and the frameworks that have in their own head about how they see the world. And they never really apply those same things to the emotional side of them, just like the physical side of them. And I'm like, if anything, life is just as much emotional as it is physical. But
Mm-hmm.
again, they're so afraid of doing that work. And so a lot of men who are asking these questions go to these other people who really just take away from that conversation. Like I just read David Goggins' book. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, but this goes a guy who is really revered in a lot of masculinity circles. And he had a very trauma filled life, like for childhood. And he went on to be like one of the strongest men in the world, doing amazing things, conquering like negative mindset, overcoming like a ton of things, really respectable. But he never really dealt with the emotional trauma of his life. And he talks about that within his book is a lot of it was to ignore that emotional labor that he had to do. He never did the emotional labor, but he was like physical labor wasn't easy, but it was easier than ever doing the emotional labor. And I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of men don't know how to do emotional labor. So for me, to kind of answer your question, the practices that I found very beneficial to me are emotional labor. So, and I'm doing some physical things too. Like I have a boxing bag now. I'm trying to become more fit because I am a little bit overweight, out of shape, trying to get my health in order there. So that is more of a physical thing. At the same time, a lot of the physical things come when you heal the emotional labor within yourself. You heal the emotional trauma, whatever it is. For me, I don't think I have a lot of trauma. I had a really good upbringing, a really good life, families all together, really privileged in that sense. I can't really think of any emotional trauma that I suffered, but I still have a lot of emotional work to do, whether that was the framework of the ideas that I had growing up or the ideologies that I'm trying to counteract and rediscover. So some tangible things that I found are journaling is a really huge one for me.
Mm-hmm.
As I've gotten to the point where I am now, journaling's always been inconsistent for me. But now I have a book called like Thoughts of 2021. I write in it, try to write in it as often as I can. Uh, whether that's I couldn't do like those ones that you buy that have like the gratitude and
Oh
all these
yeah.
like I couldn't have it like set up. I just needed a blank page to just write my thoughts. I don't want it
Mm-hmm.
structured at all. And I think that's the joy of my journals, that it's not structured. I can write and do whatever I want in it, and it's not restricted in any way, shape, or form. That's another thing that we about masculinity is in today's age is that it's so rigid. It's like you can't. It's
Mm-hmm.
not a blank page, right? For me, my life is a blank page. I think that is kind of a good metaphor for how I think about masculinity. And so journaling has been one. I read a ton. I'm trying to read 40 books this year. I don't know if I'll get there, but it's a good goal to have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on pace for 2 books a month. So at minimum, I'll read 24 books by the end of the year. And I read them about philosophy, psychology, memoirs, nonfiction, relationships, really trying to focus on a lot of those things that I don't like to read fiction because I'm like, we're living in a real world. I want to know real stuff. Like I don't care about the metaphors of fiction at all. Like I really don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I mostly read nonfiction and I write a lot. I always have a pen on me and I write in the margins. I question things in those books. I try to read 2 books or 3 books at a time. So I'm connecting dots across different books, even if they're not related at all. So I'm always trying to exercise my mind like that. I see life as a one big puzzle. Another thing is my podcast has helped wonderfully in forming my thoughts. Like I said, I'm 71 episodes in and I have more questions about what masculinity is now than I did when I started because I know
Mm-hmm.
so much more about it. And I'm constantly reading and I'm trying to figure out different things and different steps and different questions and different guests and different questions to ask different guests. So I think life as an exploration is a huge way to practice, I guess, a lot of these tips. Another one, I read a really influential book in my 5th year or 4th year of university. I forget which one it was. And I forget the name right now, but it's basically this whole concept of when you read alone, you have conversations with yourself. And it was basically a book talking about the importance of spending time alone and why Generation Z right now might have a lot more, like, it's not social media that's bad. It's the fact that we're not spending time alone, like really alone. That's
Mm-hmm.
bad without our phones, without social media. So even though the kids are like lonelier than they've ever been, they still have their phones and social media to distract them from those dark thoughts. I think those dark thoughts
Right.
are actually really valuable. They help you navigate what you need to heal, what problems you need to solve in your life. And so for me, what I've seen is I try to spend some time alone, like truly alone every day, whether it's going on a walk without my phone or without music sometimes, to really have those thoughts come up, because they will come up when you're alone and you have no other distractions. And
Mm-hmm.
I try to, that's when I don't do meditation. I try to connect the dots, see how this could be a powerful use in my life. And so this book was all talking about being alone, then being in like a group of what you yourself and another friend, right? And maybe a couple other friends, but a small group. And you share some of these thoughts that you've discovered in your own learning through your time alone, and you get feedback on them. And that feedback is really important to changing your ideas and ideologies. And
Mm-hmm.
then so you go back alone and you kind of reflect on those thoughts, and you're like, okay, maybe I'm going to piece these together now. Maybe it's a little bit more clear. Basically like live feedback. Then you go out to a group, you share those ideas with a group, like my podcast is, and people then give feedback, and they're like, okay, the public didn't understand the messaging of this thing. The public didn't like this idea. How could I change it? Take that feedback again, go alone, spend some time, go to your friends again. So it's really this book about how those three spaces and ways of thought are really important in exploring and learning about the life that you want to live. And so I think those 4 or 5 things that I mentioned in terms of journaling, spending time alone, reading, and I forget the fourth one that right off the top of my head, are really important, and what I've seen are really helpful in helping me like evolve and find my way through masculinity and life right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was a running theme throughout this entire list of tangible things you mentioned was how unstructured it should be, how free flowing, and it really gets down to the core of who it is that you are. You just let everything spill out, you analyze it, and then you gain some sort of feedback where you try to piece together all the different puzzle pieces that are coming from your journals, coming from the books that you're reading, coming from the conversations you're having with a small group of friends or a small group in the public setting. And so I think that's a great way to, because I think a lot of times we want to approach it in a structured manner. I think a lot of self development is focused in a structured setting where, you do these steps A, B, and C. You should realize this outcome that comes about from this process, when in reality this is a much more murky process, but a worthwhile process nonetheless. And so, Luke, this has been a great conversation. What I like to do at each of every single one of the end of my podcast episodes is this segment I call the 3 keys to relationship. And this is a segment where I ask guests 3 questions to gauge their own insight on relationship management. And so these questions pertain to any and all relationships. So with friends, family, romantic partners, business colleagues. And these aren't quick fire questions either as well. So I'd love to hear you expand. And so the first question I have is, what's your number one relationship red flag?
Yeah, I thought about this for a while. And as I think about my online dating experiences and a lot of my friends now, I would say the biggest thing is immature communication. So I'll like that will that's I feel like a little bit more specific than just bad communication. Immature communication in the sense of like you don't handle conflict right away. You handle conflict in a really childish manner. You play all these games. If it like that's more in friendships. You
Mm-hmm.
play childish games or the games when you're talking to someone or in the talking stage of getting to know someone. You're like, they waited 2 days. I have to wait 3 days. Like, no, if I see
Mm-hmm.
the text, I'm going to respond. That's how it works. If someone doesn't like that, they're not for me. Or if they think I'm needy, fine. They can think I'm needy. I'm sorry that I'm just doing what I can to like make
Mm-hmm.
sure that your time is valuable and my
Right.
time is valuable. I don't have time for those games. So I think a lot of it for my number big red flag would be immature communication or just like lazy excuses for bad communication. I have no time for that. I'm like, you're 22, 23, 24, 25 years old. The people I'm talking to, like, figure out your life. Get it together. I don't care. That's my
No.
by far my number one red flag.
No, I completely agree. And I think this last year, with the whole world turning upside down, has put that into perspective that no one's got as much time as they may think that they have. So there's no reason to play these games. Just own up who it is that you are, what it is that you want out of a relationship, and be unapologetic about it. Like you said. how you perceive me as a result of me being the way that I am, fine by you, but I'm not going to let that deter me from continuing to, I think it goes back to that whole idea of doing that self reflection work, like you were
Mhm.
mentioning.
Exactly. Yeah, it all comes back together. I realized that if I had to change the way I thought of myself as a individual or communication, or if I was like, overthinking the whole texting thing, I was like, this isn't true to who I am, and
Hmm.
I don't want to live a life that's not true to who I am. So I will either communicate that I need more, or I will step back and just be like, this person, like I don't really care. And if that's how they choose to communicate, I'm not angry. I don't hold resentment towards them for that. I just let them live their life and I live my life.
Right. Exactly. And so the second question I have is a little bit of a converse of that. What's in your opinion the most underrated relationship quality then?
Oh, I don't know if it's too cheap or gimmicky to go to like the exact opposite of what I just answered, but I don't think there's like such a thing as over communication. I think it's
Mhm.
really important to communicate your needs, your values, what you want early in a relationship. I think whether that's in the bedroom or as a friend or anything about what relationship you're in. I don't think it's bad to over communicate your needs because, and again, this comes back to the whole self awareness thing, is you can only communicate your needs once you know them.
Mhm.
And even I guess more underrated than that is creating a relationship and where you feel safe to communicate your needs.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge one too, is that you can trust them not to like make fun of you or to like gaslight you. That's a popular term right now in the world, gaslight you or feel bad about what you need. I think that would, I guess, if I was going to alter my answer, would be creating a safe enough relationship where that can be communicated.
Yeah, no, definitely being able to over communicate. I personally experienced it myself where as a result of not over communicating, relationships have gone to the wayside where they could have been potentially salvaged if I was more over communicative, or the person that I was with, we were able to foster a more safe, trusting space like you mentioned. And so yeah, I
Mhm.
think I think it's true. There's nothing that you can really say negative about over communicating. If anything, it'll just enhance the relationship. And similarly, once you've done that self work, you know exactly what you need. When you over communicate it, it's like either we're good, or this is going to be for the long haul, or okay, we're going to have to go part our separate ways because this is not going to work. And I found that I think, at least for me personally, and I think you would say the same, Luke, we would rather find that out earlier than later.
Correct. I don't want to waste time. I'm very upfront about what my intentions are when I'm trying to date someone. I will say if I'm not ready and I'm just looking for like, more casual conversation, I'll be very open about that because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste their time. I'm turning 25 this year, Shadman. So like I'm not trying to waste time in terms of my
Mhm.
relationship endeavors. And I think the one thing that comes back to people about why they don't communicate is one, shame, and then
Mhm.
two, their ego is like,
Mhm.
oh, my ego is, I don't want to bring myself down to a certain level, especially for men. If they're like, hey, I want to be the little spoon tonight, like there's a lot of shame in that sometimes, or just like this worry that they're going to be judged, and relationships, like a lot of there's a lot of unconscious fear about not being like the financial provider of the home because of that rigid definition of masculinity. And that's one of the things I try to talk about in my podcast too, is opening, like I don't try to, so many people are focused on redefining masculinity. I'm not focused on redefining it. I'm like focused on expanding it, and like what does it
Mhm.
mean? Because when we think about provision, typically the idea is financial provision, but like why can't you provide as a father? Why can't you provide as like a lover? You don't need to be the financial bearer all the time. If your wife has a good job, like that's fine. Like why are you so insecure about your wife making more than you?
Mhm.
You can be a provider to your family. Like, why doesn't that provision matter as
Right.
well? Right. And so it's less about redefining and more about like broadening the terms itself.
No, exactly. And I think the conversations that you're having are helping to broaden out that definition, all these conversations, because I think they're always in the back of our minds, but it's not being explicitly discussed upon. So I think what you're doing with the Imperfect Pod and just generally bringing a lot of individuals from the public with very reputable sources and reputable backgrounds to talk on them is just helping open that conversation up.
Mhm.
And so the third and final question I have is, what's your own mantra or slogan for relationship management? And we can even expand it to life at large as well.
Yeah, this has been something that crossed my mind. I don't know where I got it from. I don't know if it's mine. I don't know where it came from, but it's this idea of just because your feelings are valid doesn't make them right. And
Mhm.
that's something I've had to really apply to myself, and I try to really apply to other people. And it's just notion of, so when you respond or react to a situation, your initial emotions are valid. You can feel very right to be angry. You can be valid to feel anger. You can be validated to feel sad. And I think that's really important in a relationship, is that you're validated for your feelings. But our feelings shouldn't control us, and our emotions shouldn't control us. And our emotions, just because we're feeling that, doesn't make it right. I look at
Mhm.
that as a broad society right now, is typically we're letting our feelings dictate how we respond to a situation. We're letting our
Mhm.
feelings dictate, our feelings are right because they're natural, but it's like you can control your feelings, so clearly they're not right or wrong. And if by slapping a label on them is what is really, I think, bad. And this is a lot of stoic stuff, and I'm not really a stoic. It's a lot of meditation. Is I don't think we should attribute our emotions to be bad or good. They just are, and we should navigate them for what they are. We can navigate them because one emotion, happiness, could feel really good at, like happiness that someone died. That's not a thing to do, right? But you could easily feel it. So how do you navigate that? But then you could also feel sadness that someone died, which is the typically moral response to it. And so
Mhm.
it's more of, just because I'm angry right now doesn't give me the response, the right to act in anger. Just because I'm feeling sad right now doesn't give me the right to act with sadness. And so I think that's really one important mantra I have for navigating, especially the relationship with self,
Mhm.
but also with others, is realizing that most people are not intending to hurt us or not intending to invalidate us, and having that conversation that comes back to open conversation. And I guess my second mantra is, if you don't love yourself, nobody else will.
Mhm.
And it's not to say no one loves you. Of course, people love you, but it's more to say, if you don't love yourself, you're not fully able to accept the love that other people had for you. Because
Mhm.
I went through this for a long time. Is like I didn't love myself, so I questioned other people's love for me. So because I'm like, I don't even love myself. So how could this person possibly love me? And once you get to a place where you're comfortable loving yourself, you can fully accept and embrace other people's love and use it in like a way that's self-assuring, and really boost your self-esteem and self-confidence. So those would be my two mantras, I guess, if I'm
Mhm.
if I'm cheating a bit.
No, no, I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. And so I think kind of the theme I was able to kind of pick up on maybe throughout these three questions was the idea of being openly communicative with yourself throughout your entire experience. That's something that really enhances your relationship to self and generally your experience at large in life when it comes to relationship to others. Because when it comes to being able to communicate with yourself, be able to dig deeper into all the emotions that you're experiencing, seeing that they are valid but maybe not the right emotional response to a situation, and then also learning how to gain feedback in terms of, is the way I emotionally responded to you in this scenario something that was appropriate. And so, I love all of your responses to these, Luke. And you're doing such phenomenal work with the Imperfect Pod. I love it for individuals who are curious to learn more about, because I know we barely even scratch the surface when it comes to masculinity and broadening out the entire definition of what it means. If the listeners or viewers are interested in learning more, how can they best get connected with you and the Imperfect Pod?
Mhm. So you can listen to the Imperfect Pod on all platforms: Apple, Stitcher, Google. What's the other big one? Spotify, obviously. I can't believe I forgot that one. And I talk about conversations like cross-dressing, porn addiction, gender norms. How do gender norms exist in homosexual marriages? Because that's a really interesting component to me. Obviously, there's not the same. There's no who does the women things, who does the men things
Mhm.
in a two men household. So there's a lot of good content there. I cover a lot of different themes, ideas that I think are really important. I have women on. A lot of masculinity shows don't have women on. I like to have
Mhm.
women on because I think they're a very important part of the conversation, especially from a domestic violence and just like violent toxic masculinity perspective in society as well. Not many masculinity podcasts do that. I don't know why. They're closing themselves off to a lot of the conversation, and especially a lot of our victims that are hurt by systemic masculinity, or however you want to call it. And then my Instagram, the Imperfect Pod, you can shoot me a message. You can see daily content, or not. I'm moving away from daily content, more like 3-4 time a week content about the clips and things that I'm doing. You can engage with me there, message me there. Those are the two best ways to get in contact with me.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I will be linking all of those down below in the show notes or description for the viewers. And so, Luke, this has been such a great conversation. This has been a topic that I think really needs to be discussed upon a lot more. And the way in which you're doing it by broadening out what does it mean, learning from all different perspectives, male and female, towards what is it like to be, or rather, what should masculinity look like, and knowing that, like you mentioned, there's no one size fits all approach. There's a huge spectrum, but being able to open our ideas and open our minds to the spectrum and not be so boxed and fixed into one segment of that spectrum. And so Luke, I'd love to leave some time here at the end for you to leave any other lasting messages for the audience.
I don't have too much. Just if you if you do want to listen to the show, definitely do it. It's not an easy journey. It's a journey that takes a lot of self work, a lot of self reflection. And I constantly have to go through different experiences every day to learn more and more, especially as a white man, and how that kind of comes into the conversation. I used to think that whole narrative was BS. Now I'm at a point where it's like, okay, I can see it a bit more, and continuing to try to learn how I can be an ally through to both the LGBTQ community, my female friends, any way I can to create a world that is more equitable, is causing less harm. It is really a huge thing. And it does take a lot of ego checking, a lot of emotional reflection, and a lot of just understanding how it works. And that doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. I think it's really important to stand up for what you believe in, and fight a good fight, but also you don't have to like share everything that you do. You don't have to share every opinion. You can be quiet sometimes. That's all I'll say to that. And that's a lesson to myself too. But no, Shadman, I really appreciate you having me on. I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Hey everyone, my name is Shadman Rahman, and thanks for tuning in to my YouTube channel today. I hope you found this episode of the Between Us podcast enjoyable, and that you're walking away feeling entertained, inspired, and/or motivated. If you particularly enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and smash the like button down below and leave your thoughts in the comments section. And if you'd like to go ahead and keep up with the podcast, go ahead and follow our social media. And please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, so that way you can find out about new episodes as soon as they're released. Until next time, everyone, take care, and we'll see you all in the next episode.